The charges were read out loud, and nobody in the room looked at Ryland Doss. That was the thing he noticed first. Not the words, not the formal tone of the adjudicator's voice, just the fact that 47 cadets, 12 officers, and one full council panel all found something else to look at while his fate was being decided. The floor, the walls, their own hands, anywhere but at him. He stood in the center of the tribunal chamber on Station Varen, hands clasped behind his back the way they had taught him in his first week, boots straight, chin level. The chamber was large and cold and shaped like a bowl, with the council seated in a raised arc at the far end. Commander Drayle sat at the center of that arc. He was Valdori, tall, gray-skinned, with the kind of face that had probably never moved into anything resembling a smile. He read from a flat screen and did not look up either. Ryland had been at this academy for 14 months. In those 14 months, he had scored in the top 8% of his class on navigation theory. He had passed the endurance trial 3 days ahead of the next fastest cadet. He had repaired a failing oxygen relay in the engineering bay during a training drill when 2 other cadets froze up and did nothing, the kind of thing that instructors were supposed to note in performance files. He did not know if anyone had noted it. He suspected they had not. He was the only human on the station, not the only human in the Union. There were others scattered across a dozen posts, mostly in minor administrative roles, a few in survey teams, a couple doing technical work in shipyards. Humanity had been brought into the Galactic Union 11 years ago through a contact treaty that most of the other member species considered a charitable gesture. Humans were new. Humans were unproven. Humans were emotional, unpredictable, and prone to making decisions based on things that could not be calculated. Instinct, feeling, stubbornness. That was the general opinion. Ryland had heard some version of it every week since he arrived. He had said nothing. He had kept working. The incident that brought him to this chamber had happened 9 days ago during a joint simulation exercise. The simulation was designed around a rescue scenario, a damaged vessel, multiple crew members in danger, a strict time window. Cadet Soreth had been assigned as mission lead. Soreth was Valdori, 3rd year, the kind of cadet who walked through every corridor as if he had already graduated. His plan for the simulation had been detailed and formally correct and completely wrong. Ryland had seen it on the shared briefing screen and had understood within about 4 minutes that Soreth's approach would result in the simulated crew dying before the rescue team reached them. He had said so, quietly at first. Through the proper channels, a flag on the tactical board, a verbal note to the assistant lead. Both were ignored. When the simulation began and Soreth's approach started failing exactly the way Ryland had predicted, Ryland had broken formation, rerouted the secondary team through a different corridor, and completed the objective himself. The simulated crew survived. The mission was marked a success. Soreth had filed the insubordination report before the debrief was finished. The council had reviewed it for 9 days. Ryland had not been permitted to attend most of the review sessions. He had been told this was standard procedure. He was fairly sure it was not standard procedure. He did not have anyone to ask. Now Commander Drayle finished reading from the screen and set it face down on the table in front of him and looked at Ryland for the first time. "Cadet Doss," he said, "the Council finds the report of insubordination substantiated. A mission lead's authority during active simulation is equivalent to active field command. Deviation from that authority, regardless of outcome, represents a failure of conduct that this academy cannot permit." Ryland did not speak. He had been told he would be given a moment to respond. He was waiting for that moment. However, Drayle continued, "Dismissal from the program has been discussed and set aside. In its place, the Council is issuing a posting assignment. Effective in 4 days, you will be transferred to Survey Outpost Karos 4 for a period of solo endurance assessment. Duration is open-ended, pending monthly beacon review." Someone near the back of the room shifted in their seat. Ryland knew what Karos 4 was. He had read the survey catalog in his first month, the way he had read everything in his first month. Karos 4 was a dead planet. Barren rock, thin atmosphere, no recorded life, no infrastructure, no other personnel. The kind of place survey teams visited for 2 days and then left detailed reports about why there was nothing to report. Solo endurance assessment. That was what Drayle called it. Ryland understood what it actually was. "Do you have anything to say, Cadet?" Drayle asked. Ryland thought for a moment. Not about whether to speak. About what to say? I would like the supply manifest for the posting reviewed before departure, he said, to confirm it meets the minimum standard for a 12-month solo posting. There was a pause. That is a reasonable request, Drail said. It will be accommodated. Thank you, Ryland said. The chamber was dismissed. People filed out. Sorith passed within 2 meters of Ryland on the way to the door and did not slow down. The cadets who had been Ryland's closest thing to neutral acquaintances, not friends, but people who had spoken to him without visible discomfort, did not make eye contact. Ryland stood in the middle of the emptying room and looked at the far wall for a while. Then he went back to his quarters and started making a list of what he would need. 4 days later, he was on a transport shuttle with a cargo pallet of basic supplies and a beacon unit that was supposed to ping once a month. The shuttle crew did not speak to him. He did not mind. He sat by the viewport and watched the stars and thought about the supply manifest he had memorized, and about the survey data for Karos 4, and about what 14 months of academy training actually added up to when you stripped everything else away. The answer, he decided, was more than they thought. He watched the stars until the shuttle docked at the transit hub, and then he transferred to the drop vessel that would take him down, and he did not look back at Station Varen once. There was no point in looking at something you were going to return to. The first thing Ryland did when the drop pod hit the ground was sit still for 60 seconds and breathe. Not because he was scared, though he was. Not because he needed to calm down, though that helped. He did it because 60 seconds of stillness told him things. The sound of the wind outside, low and dry, not violent. The way the pod settled into the ground, solid rock, no shifting, no soft soil. The temperature reading on his wrist unit, -4 degrees outside, dropping. The light through the viewport, dim, gray, like a sky that had given up. Then he opened the hatch and stepped out onto Karos 4. The planet looked exactly like the survey data said it would. Flat, broken rocks stretching in every direction. A horizon that was too close, the way horizons always felt too close on low-atmosphere worlds. The sky was a dark greenish-gray, and the light came from a distant sun that gave warmth the way a painting of a fire gives warmth. Visible, but not felt. There were no trees, no soil, no water on the surface, no sound except the wind moving over rock. It was, by any reasonable definition, a dead place. Ryland looked at it for about 10 seconds, then turned around and started unloading the cargo pallet. The supply drop was exactly what the manifest had listed, which he had confirmed before departure. Survival shelter kit in 3 sections. 30 days of ration packs, compressed. A basic med kit with 14 types of treatment tabs and 1 surgical tool he hoped he would not need. A water reclamation unit that could pull moisture from air, though the air here was thin enough that it would work slowly. A handheld scanner with survey mapping software. A fire starter kit. And the beacon unit, which he set up first, before anything else, because without it no one would ever know whether he was alive. He built the shelter in 4 hours. It was not complicated. The kit had been designed for solo deployment, and the instructions were clear. When it was done, it was small and gray and half buried against a rock face for wind protection, and it looked like something an animal might crawl into to die. He decided not to think about that, and went inside and ate his first ration pack cold, because the heating element in the shelter needed another 2 hours to reach full function. The ration pack tasted like compressed cardboard with a faint suggestion of something that had once been near a vegetable. He wrote his first log entry, Day 1. Shelter built. Beacon active. Supplies intact. Immediate priority is water. Secondary priority is a long-term food source. Rations last 30 days. I need a plan before day 15. He slept badly. The ground was hard, and the shelter walls hummed in the wind. On day 3, he found the basin. He had been walking a grid pattern around his landing site, mapping the terrain with the hand scanner, looking for anything useful, a cave, a depression that might collect moisture, mineral formations that could serve as building material. 2 kilometers from the shelter, the rock dropped away into a wide sunken basin, maybe 300 meters across. The rock at the bottom of it was a different color, darker, with a wet sheen to it. He climbed down carefully and found cracks in the basin floor, and from those cracks came warm air. Warm air meant geothermal activity. He followed the largest crack to a point where the rock had partially collapsed, leaving a hole about 1.5 meters wide. He lowered the scanner down on its tether and watched the readings. Water. Liquid, not ice. A substantial body of it, maybe 15 meters below the surface. Temperature reading, 22 degrees. The survey report had said Keros 4 was geologically inert. The survey report was wrong. He sat at the edge of the hole for a long time, thinking. On day 7, he went down. He had fashioned a rope from the shelter kit's secondary tether lines, not elegant, but solid, and he lowered himself through the crack into the dark below. He had the scanner's light function active, and when his feet touched the rock ledge at the bottom and he turned and looked, he saw the lake. It was not a small body of water. It stretched away from him into darkness, smooth and black and still, and the walls of the cavern above it rose up until they disappeared into shadow. The water was warm. He could feel the heat coming off it. The scanner showed no chemical toxicity markers, which meant it was at least not immediately poisonous. He did not drink it yet. He took a sample in a spare medkit container and climbed back up to run a full analysis. The water was clean, filtered through kilometers of rock and warmed by the planet's core. He could drink it. He sat outside the hole in the basin and looked at the dim sky and felt something shift in his chest. Not happiness exactly. More like the sensation of a door opening in a room you had thought had no doors. On day 12, he caught his first fish. He had made the rod from shelter support rods and the fishing line from tether cords stripped down to single fibers. The hook had taken him 2 days to shape from a piece of metal edging on the cargo pallet. He did not know what was in the water. The scanner showed organic movement, small, multiple signatures, which was already more life than the entire planet's survey file had credited. He dropped the line in and waited. The thing he pulled up was about 20 centimeters long, pale, no eyes, 6 thin fins along a flat body. It was not anything the Union had cataloged. He turned it over in his hand, and it flapped weakly. He looked at it for a while. "Sorry," he said to it, and added it to a container of lake water and climbed back up to the surface to work on a cooking method. He had food. He had water. He updated his log. Day 12. Protein source confirmed. Immediate survival situation resolved. Beginning detailed survey of the subsurface ecosystem. This planet is not dead. The survey team that filed that report was simply not looking in the right places. He paused before closing the entry, then added, "I am fine." On day 19, something looked back at him. He had been sitting on the rock ledge above the water line in the water, watching the surface. It was quiet down there. Quietly was something he was getting used to. He had started talking aloud while he worked, narrating his actions, describing what he saw, saying whatever came into his head, because the silence was the hardest part, harder than the cold, harder than the food, harder than the physical work. He had been describing, to nobody, the shape of the cavern's ceiling and how it reminded him of a place he had been once, a river valley back on Earth, when the water in front of him moved. Not rippled, moved. A large, slow displacement, something vast turning below the surface, and then stillness again. He pulled his line up quickly. His heart was loud in his ears. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, at the edge of his light's reach, something surfaced. Just for a second. He saw a broad, flat head, smooth and dark, with 2 wide-set eyes that caught the light and held it. Pale green, steady, and large enough to see clearly from where he sat. Then it went back down without a sound. Ryland sat very still. "Okay," he said quietly to the dark water. "So there is something else down here." He packed up his line, climbed back to the surface, and wrote 4 pages of notes. Then he lay in his shelter and stared at the ceiling for a long time before he slept. He was not afraid, exactly. It was something more complicated than fear. He went back the next morning. Ryland learned, early in his life, that the best way to understand something was to leave it alone and let it come to you. His grandfather had taught him that. Old man, very patient, who used to take him to a lake outside the city and sit for hours without speaking, watching the water. Young Ryland had asked him once why they never talked while they fished. His grandfather had said, without looking away from the water, "Because the fish don't know what talking is, but they know what stillness is. So you speak their language first." Ryland thought about that a lot in the weeks after the first sighting. He went back to the underground lake every day. He brought his fishing line, caught what he needed, and then sat quietly on the ledge and waited. He did not call out to whatever was down there. He did not splash the water or throw things in. He just sat, with his light low so it would not be harsh, and fished, and waited, and sometimes spoke very softly about ordinary things. He talked about the cavern's ceiling and how it was shaped. He talked about what day it was and what the wind sounded like on the surface. He talked about things that had happened to him at the academy. Small things, not the tribunal, just moments. A meal he had liked. A calculation problem that had taken him 3 days to solve. A view of a nebula from the observation deck that had been, for about 20 seconds, the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He did not know if anything hurt him. He kept talking anyway. On day 31, the creature came close enough that he could see the full shape of it. He had named it Garath 14 days ago, mostly because his logs kept referring to it as the large one, or the thing in the water, and that felt imprecise. Naming it felt more honest. He noted in his log that he understood naming it might be projecting significance onto something that was simply a large predator in a dark lake. He then continued to call it Garath. Garath was large. That had been clear from the first surfacing. Up close, it was a different experience. The body was easily 15 meters, maybe more. It was hard to judge in the dark water. 6 limbs, 3 on each side, thick and flexible, used more for steering than propulsion. The tail was broad and horizontal, like a paddle, moving in slow sweeps. The skin was dark and smooth, and along the flanks and the underside of the jaw there were lines of bioluminescence, soft blue-green, running in patterns like rivers seen from above. They pulsed slowly when Garath was still and moved faster when it swam. The eyes were the thing that stayed with him. Pale green, very wide, with a kind of focused attention that did not feel like an animal watching something. It felt like a person deciding something. Garath surfaced 3 meters from the ledge and looked at him. Ryland set down his fishing line and looked back. They stayed like that for about 4 minutes. Then Garath went down slowly, barely a ripple, and was gone. Ryland wrote 6 pages of notes that night. On day 38, he tried something. Before he lowered his line, he tapped the rock ledge twice with his knuckle. 2 clear, solid knocks. Then he dropped the line and fished. Garath did not appear that day, which he had expected. He was not testing Garath yet. He was testing himself, building the pattern before the pattern meant anything. He tapped twice every day before fishing. For 11 days, nothing changed. On day 49, he was running a water sample analysis on the ledge, scanner in his lap, small container of lake water beside him, and he had not yet tapped. He reached over to tap, and his knuckle caught the container instead, and it fell into the water with a clear, sharp sound. Garath surfaced within 40 seconds, right next to the ledge. Not slowly, the way it usually moved. Quickly. The bioluminescent lines were bright, pulsing fast. Ryland sat very still and watched. After a moment, Garath's light slowed. It held position next to the ledge, looking at him, and then after about 2 minutes it sank back down. He thought about that for a long time. The sound had brought Garath quickly. That meant Garath had been listening, which meant Garath was close, or regularly close, and paying attention to the sounds from the ledge. On day 52, he tapped twice as usual. Garath surfaced before the line hit the water. He sat with that fact for a while. The creature had connected the tapping to his presence. 2 knocks meant Ryland was there. Garath came to the sound. That was not predator behavior, at least not simple predator behavior. A predator would be waiting for weakness, for an opportunity. Garath surfaced in the open, in the light, and looked at him. He wrote in his log, "I think we are communicating. I do not know what I am saying to it, or what it is saying to me, but something is being said." Day 61 brought the first real crisis. He had been down in the cavern longer than usual, mapping a far wall with the scanner, when he heard a sound he had not heard before, a deep, resonant clicking from somewhere lower in the water, different from the way Garath moved. Then something hit the rock ledge from below hard enough to crack it. A piece of the ledge broke away and fell into the water. He scrambled back from the edge. His light swung, and he caught a glimpse of something, smaller than Garath, faster, with a narrow body and a jaw that seemed too large for its head. It hit the rock again, and another piece broke away. It was trying to get onto the ledge. He had nowhere to go. The rope to the surface was at the far end of the ledge. The creature hit the rock a 3rd time. Then the water erupted. Garath came from below at speed, bioluminescence blazing, and the impact of its body hitting the smaller creature was loud enough to echo through the whole cavern. There was a brief, violent churning of water, sound and light and movement. And then the narrow creature was gone, moving fast through the water toward the lower vents. And Garath was at the surface again, still and bright, watching Rylan. Rylan was pressed against the cavern wall. His hands were shaking. He looked at Garath for a long moment. "Thank you," he said. He was not sure why he said it. It was just the thing that came out. Garath's lights pulsed twice, slow, even, and then dimmed back to their normal steady glow. The creature held position by the ledge for the rest of the time Rylan was down there, and then followed him slowly to the rope point as he climbed up, and only went back under when he reached the surface. He sat in the basin for a while before going back to his shelter. The sun, such as it was low and the shadows were long and the rock was cold under him. He thought about what had just happened. Not the attack, though that mattered. The part after. Garath staying. Following him to the rope. Waiting until he was clear. That was a choice. Something had decided to do that. He updated his log. Day 61. Aggressive unknown species encountered in lower cavern. Garath intervened. "I am uninjured. Garath appears to have made a decision to act in my defense. I do not have a scientific framework for what I observed today. I am going to write down what I saw exactly as I saw it and not try to explain it, because I do not think I have the right vocabulary yet." He paused, and then added, "I think he knew I could not get away on my own." He closed the log and sat in the quiet for a while. Then he went inside and made a meal from his own dwindling rations. He was fishing well enough now that he rarely needed them. But tonight he wanted something familiar, and he ate slowly and thought about his grandfather and the lake outside the city and what stillness sounded like when you finally got good at it. He had been on Karos for 61 days. He had stopped counting how long until rescue. He had started counting something else instead. The days since Garath had first come close. The days since the tapping began. The days since a creature that should not exist on a dead planet had decided, for reasons Rylan could not fully explain, that the strange small surface dweller on the rock ledge was worth paying attention to. It was, he wrote in his final entry for the night, the most interesting thing that had ever happened to him. He meant it completely. There is a particular kind of person who, when given nothing to do, invents something to do, and then does it thoroughly, and then documents it. Rylan Doss was that kind of person. By day 90, he had mapped the entire ledge system of the upper cavern. By day 110, he had cataloged 11 distinct species of fish-like creatures from the underground lake, sketching each one in the back pages of his log with careful annotations of size, coloring, fin structure, and behavior. By day 130, he had built a raft. The raft had started as an idea written in a single log sentence. "If I could move laterally across the lake's surface, I could access the far walls and potentially find other access points." From that sentence, he had spent 4 days figuring out what materials he had, which ones he could shape and bind, and how to test buoyancy on a small scale before committing to a full build. The finished product was not elegant. 4 sections of cargo pallet frame lashed with tether cord, with a shelter rod pole and a flat piece of rock for steering, but it floated, and it held his weight, and when he lowered it through the crack in the basin floor and assembled it on the ledge and pushed off from the rock, it moved. Garath appeared within 2 minutes. The creature came up alongside the raft, slow and parallel, bioluminescent lines steady and calm. It matched the raft's pace exactly. Not circling, not investigating, just moving with him across the water. Rylan sat on the raft in the middle of a dark underground lake on a dead planet, with a 15-meter glowing creature gliding silently beside him, and felt something he had not felt in a long time. Content. He felt genuinely content. "Good morning," he said to Garath. "I built a boat." Garath's lights pulsed once, slowly. Over the following weeks, he explored. The lake was larger than he had estimated. The far wall was nearly 400 meters from the ledge, and the cavern opened up in both directions along it. He found 3 other entry points from the surface, all collapsed but potentially clearable. He found a passage at the water level on the south wall, wide enough to float through, which led to a second, smaller cavern and then, after 3 more hours of careful navigation, opened into something that took his breath away. The underground sea. It was vast. His light could not reach the far side. The ceiling was 40 meters up at minimum, crusted with mineral formations that caught the light and scattered it in slow, cold colors. The water was darker here, deeper and warmer, and the bioluminescence of the creatures in it, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, at various depths, made the whole space glow like something between a night sky and a dream. Garath came through the passage behind him, easily, and surfaced next to the raft and looked at him. "You knew this was here," Ryland said. He wrote 11 pages of notes that day. He started a second log book using the blank sections of his supply manifest. He also, on the same day, ran his one-year calculation. He had been on Karos 4 for 143 days. 4.5 months. The beacon had pinged 3 times. No response had come. The communication relay had been broken on arrival, which he had filed mentally under intentional, and then put aside because it did not change anything actionable. The beacon pings themselves worked fine, they transmitted. Whether anyone acted on them was a separate question, and one he had no control over, so he had decided early on not to spend energy on it. What he did have control over was his own condition, his knowledge base, and his plans. He updated his fitness routine, which he had been running every surface morning since week 2. Pull-ups on a rock overhang he had found near the shelter. A running circuit around the basin. Hand grip exercises with a piece of cord. Basic tactical drills from memory, run through in sequence, because he was not going to return to the academy out of shape. He was going to return to the academy better than when he had left, in every way he could measure. He also started reviewing regulations. He had memorized a significant portion of the Union's officer training manual during his 14 months at the academy, not because he was told to, but because he had learned early that the people who could cite the rules were harder to dismiss than the people who just followed them. Now, in the evenings in his shelter, with the wind outside and the heating element humming, he went through sections from memory, argued both sides of each rule aloud, and noted the places where the regulations were either unclear or contradicted each other. He was building a case file in his head, not for anything specific, just in case. He caught himself thinking about Sorith sometimes. Not with anger. Anger required energy, and he had things to spend energy on. More with a kind of calm analytical interest. Sorith had believed, genuinely, that Ryland did not belong in the program. That belief had driven everything that followed. Ryland had spent time, in his early weeks on Karos 4, wondering if there was something he could have done differently, whether a different approach would have avoided the tribunal. He had concluded, eventually, that the answer was no. The outcome had been decided before the incident. The incident was just the mechanism. He had not done anything wrong in the simulation. He had made the correct call, in the correct situation, and the correct call had not been acceptable because he was the one who made it. You could not strategy your way around that. You could only outlast it. He intended to outlast it. On day 167, Garath did something new. Ryland was on the raft in the large underground sea, working on a detailed sketch of the cavern ceiling formation, when Garath surfaced closer than usual, and stayed there. Ryland looked up from his sketch. Garath's large pale eyes were on him, steady. Then Garath moved forward, very slowly, and the broad side of the creature's body made gentle contact with the edge of the raft. Not a hit, not an accident. A touch, deliberate and slow. Ryland put his hand out, palm flat, and Garath held the raft still for 5 full seconds before pulling back. He sat with his hand still out over the water for a while after Garath had moved away. Then he wrote in his log, Day 167. Physical contact. Initiated by Garath, not by me. Held for approximately 5 seconds. No aggression, no alarm behavior before or after. I have spent several minutes trying to find an explanation for this that does not involve intent. I cannot find one. He underlined the last sentence. He rarely underlined things. What none of Ryland knew was that far above him, in the cold of space, something had noticed Karos 4. A Union survey drone on a long automated route had passed within range of the planet and picked up the beacon signal. Active, steady, transmitting. The drone logged it and moved on. The log reached a Union relay station 3 weeks later, was filed by a junior communications officer who noted it as a possible sensor artifact, and moved into a standard review queue. It might have stayed there. But the drone had also captured a thermal scan of the planet's subsurface on the same pass, and the thermal scan showed something that did not match the survey file. 2 heat signatures in the subsurface, one small and consistent, moving in regular patterns. One very large, also moving and clearly coordinating with the smaller one. An analyst in the union's deep survey branch pulled the file 6 days later. She looked at the coordinated movement patterns for a long time. Then she sent the file to her supervisor with a single note attached. This doesn't match the survey data for Keros 4. The small signature is biometric. It looks like a person. Her supervisor sent it up the chain. The chain, eventually, reached someone who checked the original posting assignment records for Keros 4 and found one entry. Cadet Ryland Doss, human, transferred to solo endurance posting, day 186 ago. There was a long pause in the processing of that information, at several levels of the chain simultaneously, as multiple people absorbed the fact that the human was not only alive, but apparently moving around in coordinated patterns with something very large. A recovery vessel was quietly dispatched. On Keros 4, Ryland built a second raft, bigger, for longer expeditions. He named the underground See the Garath Basin in his notes, for lack of any official name. He caught a new species of creature on day 192 that was nearly a meter long and tasted. When cooked over a geothermal vent, he had figured out how to use as a heat source, surprisingly close to something he remembered eating at a food stall once, a long time ago, before all of this. He sat by the underground sea with his meal and Garath drifting silently beside the raft, light slow and calm, and he ate, and was quiet, and thought about nothing in particular. He was thinner than he had been, harder in the way that people get hard when things are difficult for a long time. His hands were calloused and his notes were meticulous, and he had not spoken to another person in 192 days. He was also, in a way he would not have been able to explain easily, doing fine. He tapped twice on the raft's edge. Garath's lights pulsed twice back. The beacon pinged overhead in the dark. Nobody on Keros 4 heard the recovery vessel enter orbit. But it was there. The recovery team landed at dawn, which on Keros 4 meant slightly less dark than nighttime. There were 6 of them, a small crew, standard for a single personnel retrieval. Captain Voss led them out of the lander in full environmental gear, scanners active. She was Marini, practical by nature, not the type to assume outcomes before she had data. Her orders had been simple: retrieve Cadet Ryland Doss, status unknown, from survey posting Keros 4. The thermal data from the drone scan had been included in her briefing but not explained, because no one higher up had been able to explain it. She had read it 3 times on the journey and formed no conclusions. The landing site was near the beacon signal. What they found there was a shelter, small, heavily modified with additions that were not in any supply kit she had ever seen, pieces of cargo frame and rock and tether cord built into windbreaks and a storage alcove, and what appeared to be a drying rack with strips of something hanging on it. The shelter was tidy. There were neat stacks of supply containers, all labeled in human script. There was a flat section of cargo pallet that had been turned into a working surface, with organized tool rows. Someone had been living here. Seriously, carefully, for a long time. Beacons active, one of her crew said. Biometric signal is 2.3 kilometers southeast. Moving toward us. Voss turned to look in that direction. He came out of the basin on foot, climbing up from the rock depression without hurrying. He was lean in the way that people are after sustained hard physical work, not starved, but stripped down, nothing extra anywhere. He wore his original cadet kit, patched in several places with strips of material she could not identify. His boots were reinforced with something dark and smooth along the soles. He carried a scanner in one hand and a flat object that turned out to be a hand-built notebook when she got a closer look. He stopped about 10 meters from the lander and looked at the team. "Captain," he said. "Cadet Doss," she said. "You are in good health?" "Yes. We have a medical officer aboard if you need." "I'm fine. Thank you." He paused. "I need to tell you something before we discuss anything else." She waited. "There is a native life form on this planet," he said. "A large one. Sapient, or close enough that I cannot find a meaningful distinction. It lives in the subsurface lake system southeast of here. I have 214 days of observational data on it. It is not aggressive toward me, but it has bonded with me, and I am not going to leave without it." There was a silence. One of her crew, behind her, made a sound she chose not to acknowledge. "How large?" she said. 15 meters. Possibly more." Another silence. Voss was, as mentioned, practical. She did not say what several members of her crew were visibly thinking. She said, "Show me." He took them to the basin. They climbed down. At the crack in the basin floor, most of the crew stopped, but Voss went down with Rylan, through the rope system he had rigged, and stood on the rock ledge in the underground lake cavern and looked at the dark water. Rylan tapped twice on the rock. The wait was about 30 seconds. Then Garath surfaced. The bioluminescence lit up the cavern. Voss stood very still. Even she, in 15 years of field work that had included some genuinely strange things, had a moment of complete stillness in which her body made its own assessment of the situation before her training reasserted itself. Garath was large. The lines of light along its body pulsed steadily. It looked at them, at Rylan first, then at Voss with a calm, measuring attention that she recognized with a start as similar to the look she gave new crew members on their first day. Rylan said quietly, "It's okay. This is someone I know." He paused and then said to Voss, "I don't know how much it understands spoken language, but context seems to matter." Voss watched Garath for a long time. Then she said, "I am going to need a larger vessel." Getting Garath off Karos, 4 took 8 days. Voss sent for a Union cargo transport with an aquatic hold, the kind used for research specimen transport, usually for much smaller specimens. She requisitioned 300 tons of water pulled from the underground lake by pump lines lowered through the basin crack. It was, logistically, one of the stranger things she had organized in her career. She filed every step of it in her mission log with meticulous care because she had a feeling this was going to be reviewed by a lot of people. Rylan spent those 8 days in near constant presence at the lake entrance, explaining the situation to Garath in his quiet, one-sided conversational way, describing what was going to happen and what the vessel was and why. Whether Garath understood the specifics, nobody could say. What was clear was that Garath remained calm, accepted the introduction to the pump crew without incident, and on the day of transport, followed Rylan, who rowed in a small boat lowered into the hold, into the cargo vessel's aquatic tank without resistance. Voss watched from the observation rail as the transfer completed and wrote in her personal log, which was not an official document. "I have been doing this work for 15 years. I have never seen anything like this." The creature follows him like a large, bioluminescent dog that has decided he is the most important thing in its world. The cadet talks to it constantly, the way people talk to someone they know well, and the creature's light patterns visibly change when he speaks. I do not have a category for what I observed today. I will leave that for the biologists. The journey back to Station Varen took 9 days. Rylan spent most of it with Garath, sitting by the observation glass of the aquatic hold, talking and working through his notes and preparing. He ate regular meals for the first time in months. He slept in an actual bunk. He reviewed regulations. He was preparing. He had been preparing since day 143. Word traveled ahead of them. It always did on Union channels, not official announcements, but the kind of low, rapid movement of information that happens when something genuinely strange is inbound and people want to know about it before it arrives. By the time the cargo transport docked at Station Varen, there were people in the docking bay who had no professional reason to be there. There were cadets. There were officers. There were 2 diplomatic observers who had materialized from somewhere and were standing near the back looking carefully neutral. There were science staff with equipment cases who had clearly run to get there. Soreth was there. He stood to the left, in a group of Valdori cadets, and his expression was the careful blankness of someone who has been told, by every instinct they have, to show nothing. Commander Drail was there. Someone had made sure he would be. He stood at the front, flanked by 2 adjutants, with the posture of a man who has decided his face will not react to anything. The docking bay doors opened. Rylan walked out. He was in his patched cadet kit. He had not changed. He had considered putting on a clean uniform from the ship's supply, and then he had decided against it, because the patched kit was honest, and he was done with things that were not honest. He carried his 2 log books under his arm. He walked at normal pace and stopped in the middle of the bay and looked at the crowd. The crowd looked at him. Behind him, through the large observation window of the cargo transport's aquatic hold, Garath drifted in the dark water, bioluminescent lines glowing softly, large pale eyes watching the crowd through the glass. The silence went on for a moment. Then someone in the back of the room, he never found out who, one of the cadets, began to applaud. It was not organized. It was just one person, and then 2 more, and then it spread in the uncoordinated way that genuine reactions spread, different from performed ones. Ryland did not react to the applause. He looked at Drail. Drail looked back. "Commander," Ryland said, loud enough to carry. "I have 3 requests. First, the life form in that transport hold requires immediate formal review for sapience classification and diplomatic recognition. I have 214 days of observational data to support the assessment. Second, I would like my rank reinstated. Third, I want the Karos 4 subsurface biome placed under protected survey status. I have cataloged 23 distinct species, 11 of which are not in the Union's records." He paused. "I can discuss the details of my own situation after those 3 things are in motion. I don't think the order is controversial." Drill was quiet for a moment. "No," he said finally, and his voice was measured and careful. "I don't suppose it is." Ryland nodded once. Then he turned back to the observation window and tapped twice on the glass. In the dark water, Garatha's lights pulsed twice back. The room, watching this, was very quiet. Voss, standing near the docking bay entrance, wrote one final line in her personal log later that evening. "I am glad I was the one they sent to Karos for. I do not think I will work on anything more interesting than this for the rest of my career. And I have had a good career." The formal review for Garatha's sapience classification took 11 days. Ryland had expected it to take longer. The Union's xenobiology and diplomatic divisions were not known for moving quickly. New species classification was a process layered in reviews and subcommittees and precedent debates that could stretch for months. But Ryland had 214 days of log entries, organized by date and category and cross-referenced with behavioral data. He had sketched anatomy, noted communication patterns, recorded response times, documented the attack incident and Garatha's intervention in detail, and written a clear, plain language analysis of why the communication between them constituted intentional signaling rather than conditioned response. He had prepared that analysis on the ship during the 9-day journey. He had been preparing since day 143. He had known, even then, sitting on a raft in an underground sea on a dead planet, that if he ever got back, the first argument he would have to win was this one. The xenobiology team reviewed the logs. Then they interviewed Ryland. 3 sessions, each 2 hours, with detailed questions. Then they requested observation time with Garath. The observation sessions were the thing that moved the process. Garath was in a large aquatic habitat that had been assembled in Station Varen's outer ring. A proper facility, fed by water from Karos 4 delivered by a second cargo run, maintained at the right temperature. The observation deck had glass walls on 3 sides. The xenobiology team stood at the glass on day 3 of their review, and Ryland stood beside them, and Ryland tapped twice on the glass. Garath surfaced within 40 seconds, bioluminescent line steady, and looked at Ryland. Then Ryland stepped aside, and one of the xenobiologists, a young Marini researcher named Dr. Sale, moved to the glass. Garath looked at Dr. Sale for a long moment, then looked at Ryland, then back at Dr. Sale. Ryland said, quietly, "She's a friend." Garatha's lights shifted slightly, a slower pulse, and the creature held position at the glass, watching Dr. Sale with that same calm, measuring attention that Voss had noticed in the cavern. Dr. Sale stood very still for a moment, and then she turned to Ryland and said, with a careful scientist's effort to keep her voice neutral, "It's assessing me." "Yes," Ryland said. "Based on your endorsement." "That's my interpretation." "Yes." Dr. Sale turned back to the glass and looked at Garath and was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I think your analysis is correct, Cadet Doss. I think we need to revise our paperwork." The council session on sapience classification was, by Union standards, unusually direct. Ryland presented a summary of his findings. Dr. Sale's team submitted their preliminary assessment. 2 diplomatic observers from member species who had been involved in past first contact classifications asked technical questions that Ryland answered without hesitation because he had been arguing both sides of every relevant point in his head for months. The vote was not close. Garatha's species, formally designated corrosions in the Union's new filing, Garatha's kind in every document Ryland wrote, without exception, was classified as sapient and afforded the full protections and diplomatic consideration that classification carried. Karos IV's subsurface biome was placed under protected survey status. A dedicated research team was to be assembled. After the session, Drayle found Ryland in the corridor outside the council chamber. They stood in the corridor for a moment, two people with nothing easy to say to each other. The posting decision was lawful, Drayle said. Not defensively, just as a statement. Yes, Ryland said. It was. Drayle was quiet for a moment. The outcome suggests the decision was not wise. Ryland looked at him. Drayle's face was difficult to read. It always was. But something in it was different from the cold certainty of the tribunal chamber. Not remorse, exactly. More like a man recalculating. No, Ryland said. It wasn't wise. But it's done. I'm more interested in what happens next than in what happened before. Drayle nodded once, slowly, and walked away. Ryland watched him go, and then turned back toward the habitat section. Sorith's situation resolved itself without drama, which was the appropriate way for it to resolve. The falsified training logs had been buried under procedure and closed files, but renewed attention on Ryland's case. From the council, from the diplomatic observers, from Dr. Sale's team who had asked to review the original tribunal record as part of their classification documentation, meant that the files were being looked at again by people who were looking carefully. The inconsistencies in the logs were not difficult to find if you were looking for them. An independent review was opened. Sorith and two of the cadets who had assisted him were placed under formal investigation. Ryland was not called to testify. He had not asked to be. He had given a full account of the simulation incident when asked, plainly and without emphasis, and left it at that. He did not want Sorith punished. He wanted the record to be accurate. Those were different things, and it mattered to him that they were different things. His rank was reinstated in a short administrative session that took less than 20 minutes. No ceremony. He had not asked for ceremony. What he had asked for, in writing, through proper channels, with supporting arguments, was the creation of a new posting, Union Corrosion Liaison Officer, the first and currently only position of its kind. The role would be based at Station Varen, with regular travel to Karos for as the research program developed, responsible for coordinating between the Union's scientific and diplomatic teams and Garath's species as contact was gradually, carefully expanded. It took the Union 6 days to approve it, faster than he had expected. He suspected that speed had something to do with the fact that Garath would not cooperate with anyone else. The xenobiology team had tried, 3 times, to conduct observation sessions without Ryland present. Garath had surfaced each time, assessed the researchers through the glass, and then returned to the depths of the habitat without further interaction. Dr. Sale had documented this with clinical precision and then sent Ryland a private message that read, "I believe the corrosion in our facility has established a preference. The Union may wish to consider whether it is practical to proceed with research that requires the specific cooperation of a 15-meter apex predator that has opinions about who it will work with." Ryland had read that message and smiled for what felt like the first time in a long time. He went to the habitat every day, sometimes twice. He sat in the observation room on the lower level where the glass met the water's surface and talked the way he had talked on the ledge underground, about the day, about what was happening, about what came next. Garath drifted in the dark water below the lights and listened, or did whatever it was Garath did that looked enough like listening that Ryland had stopped finding a different word for it. He brought his logbooks and worked on the formal scientific write-up of his underground sea surveys. Dr. Sale's team was incorporating his data into their initial corrosion report, and he sat in on those sessions and answered questions and found, to his own mild surprise, that he enjoyed the work. The careful process of turning 200 days of notes into something precise and documented and useful. On the 22nd day after his return, he was alone in the observation room, writing, when the door opened and a group of cadets came in, a school visit, young students from the Academy's junior intake, brought to see the new habitat. They filed in quietly and pressed their faces against the glass and stared into the dark water. One of them, a small Valdori student with wide eyes, noticed Ryland and said, "Are you the human who lived there?" "Yes," Ryland said. "For 2 years." "About that." The student thought about this carefully. "Were you scared?" Ryland considered the question honestly, the way he tried to consider every question. "At first," he said, "but there was too much to do to stay scared." The student looked at the water, where Garath was now visible, drifting toward the glass with the slow grace of something that had no reason to hurry. The bioluminescent lines pulsed in the steady rhythm Ryland knew as well as his own heartbeat by now. Is it true you go fishing together? The student asked. We do, Ryland said. The student stared at Garath through the glass. How did you teach it to fish with you? Ryland thought about the ledge and the darkness and the months of tapping twice on the rock and his grandfather's lake and what stillness sounded like when you finally got good at it. He thought about 61 days of quiet patience, and the moment Garath had stayed by the rope until he reached the surface, and the first time he had put his hand against the glass of the aquatic hold on the cargo transport and felt the faint answering pressure on the other side. I didn't teach it anything, he said. I just showed up every day. The student looked at Garath and then looked at Ryland and nodded with the seriousness of someone filing that information away for future use. Garath pressed forward against the glass, slow and luminous, and looked at the row of small faces looking back, and the bioluminescent lines ran in their river patterns down its flanks and pulsed with the same slow, calm rhythm they always used when everything was fine. Later, after the group had gone, Ryland sat alone in the quiet observation room and wrote his final log entry from the Kairos 4 period, which he had been holding back because he had not known the right way to close it until now. He wrote, The Union exiled a human to a dead world and expected silence. They got 2 years of patience, 600 pages of field notes, and a diplomatic incident that changed the definition of the word alone in 17 languages. Garath's species has now been formally recognized. The underground sea has been protected. My rank has been returned. None of this is what they intended when they sent me there. He paused. Then he wrote, I am not sure they understand yet what they almost lost. Not me, specifically, but the kind of outcome that only comes from leaving someone with nothing but time and the decision about what to do with it. The decision matters. That's the part they couldn't predict and couldn't control, and that's exactly the part that changed everything. He closed the log. In the water below, Garath turned in a slow, wide circle, light steady, and then surfaced once, quietly, and looked at him through the glass. Ryland tapped twice. Garath's lights pulsed twice back. Outside, Station Varen moved through the dark on its slow orbit, and somewhere in the Union's administrative systems, a new posting record had been created for the first time in the Union's history. Corrosion Liaison Officer, Grade 1. 1 occupant. Human. And in a deep, protected biome on a planet that everyone had agreed was dead, the underground sea moved on in its slow, warm dark, full of uncatalogued things waiting to be found by someone patient enough to look.